Call came at 2047 in the morning. I know the exact time because I'd been awake anyway, sitting in the kitchen with a cold cup of coffee, watching the rain streak down the window glass. When you're 63 and your knees ache and your mind won't quiet down, sleep becomes something other people do. I'd gotten used to the dark hours. They were mine. But that ringtone, my son's ringtone, at 2047 in the morning turned the kitchen cold in a way the rain never could. I picked up before the second ring. Dad. His voice was strange, thin, like he was talking through a wall. Dad, it's Iris. They took her to Mercy General. You need to come. Iris, my daughter-in-law, 31 years old, healthy as anyone I'd ever known, ran half marathons on weekends, kept a garden in the backyard of the house I'd helped them buy 3 years ago. Mercy General was 20 minutes from my place in Clearwater. What happened? I was already standing, already reaching for my car keys on the hook by the door. She fell, my son said. Down the stairs. They don't know yet. Dad, just come. I drove through the rain without remembering most of it. When I walked through the emergency entrance and found my son in the waiting area, what struck me first was that he didn't look frightened. I'd expected frightened. I'd expected a man whose wife had just been rushed to the hospital in the middle of the night. What I saw instead was something harder to name. He was sitting with his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. And when he looked up at me, the expression that crossed his face lasted only half a second before he rearranged it into something more appropriate. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself it was the fluorescent light. I'd spent 31 years as a forensic accountant. I was trained to notice things that didn't add up, and sometimes that training turned into a sickness, a habit of suspicion that had cost me more than one friendship over the years. I told myself, your daughter-in-law is somewhere in this building, possibly hurt, and your son is scared. That's all this is. I put my hand on his shoulder. Tell me what happened. He told me they'd been arguing. Nothing serious, he said quickly. Just stress, work stuff, money stuff. She'd been heading upstairs and she slipped. He'd heard the sound from the living room and found her at the bottom of the staircase. He'd called 911 immediately. How long had she been there? I asked. Between when she fell and when you found her. He looked at me. I don't know, Dad. Maybe a minute. Maybe 2. I nodded. I sat down beside him. I did not say what I was thinking. We waited for 4 hours. A doctor came out around 7 in the morning and told us Iris had a serious concussion, a fractured wrist, and 2 cracked ribs. She was stable. She was going to be admitted for observation. My son could see her in about an hour. I went to get us both coffee from the machine down the hall. I was standing there, feeding quarters into the slot, when a nurse appeared beside me. She was maybe 45. Dark hair pulled back, the kind of face that had seen enough to make it careful. She glanced over her shoulder before she spoke. You're the father-in-law, she said quietly. Of the woman who came in the fall. Yes. She looked at me for a moment like she was deciding something. Then she said, I've been a nurse for 18 years. I've seen a lot of falls. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The coffee machine hummed. Something in my chest went very still. What are you telling me? I said. I'm not telling you anything, she said. I'm just saying the pattern of her injuries, where the bruising is. It's not consistent with falling forward down a flight of stairs. She paused. A person who falls forward catches themselves. Their hands go out. That's instinct. It's what the body does. I thought of the fractured wrist, the cracked ribs. I thought about what she wasn't saying. Her wrist is broken, I said slowly. Her right wrist, the nurse said. Yes. But the fracture pattern it's more consistent with impact from behind, with someone who didn't have the chance to reach out. She met my eyes. I could be wrong. I want to be wrong. I want to be wrong, but I've been watching him all morning, and I wanted someone to know what I'm thinking, just in case. She walked away before I could respond. I stood there with 2 cups of bad coffee and 31 years of training telling me to pay attention to the thing I did not want to see. My son's name is Vincent. He is 34 years old. I named him after my father, who was a good man, and for 32 of those 34 years I believed, with everything in me, that I had raised someone worth that name. The other 2 years, the last two, I had been noticing things. Small things. The way he spoke about money constantly, always framing it as a problem, always returning to the subject of my retirement accounts, my house in Clearwater, what I planned to do with things when I was gone. He brought my will up 4 times in 18 months. I told myself it was anxiety, that he'd always been a worrier, that the housing market was brutal for his generation, and I didn't blame him for thinking about the future. Iris had worked as a paralegal at a firm downtown. Good job, decent salary. 3 months ago, she told me over Sunday dinner that she was thinking of going back to school, getting her law degree. She'd seemed excited, happy even. Vincent, sitting across the table, had said almost nothing. I drove home from the hospital that morning and I sat in my kitchen again, but this time the coffee was hot and I was thinking very clearly. I called my old colleague Philip. We'd worked together for 20 years at the same firm before I retired, and he still had contacts everywhere. Insurance adjusters, private investigators, 1 or 2 people in the county clerk's office who owed him favors. "I need someone to look into something," I said, quietly. "How quietly?" he asked. "Like it never happened," I said. While Philip made calls, I did my own digging. I still had access to the joint account Vincent and I shared, a holdover from when he was in college that we'd never gotten around to closing. There wasn't much in it, a few $100s, but it let me see certain things, patterns, and what I saw was that in the past 4 months, Vincent had been making regular cash withdrawals. Nothing enormous, 300 here, 500 there, but consistent, rhythmic, like payments. I also found, tucked into the back of my filing cabinet, a copy of the beneficiary designation form for my life insurance policy. I'd filled it out 12 years ago, listing Vincent as primary beneficiary. Standard. Normal. But when I called the insurance company that afternoon and asked them to read me the current designation on file, the woman on the phone told me that a change request had been processed 8 weeks ago. A new form, still listing Vincent as primary, but now also listing a secondary beneficiary I had never heard of, a name I didn't recognize, an address in Tampa. "I did not authorize that change," I said. Silence on the other end. "Sir, we have a signed form on file." "I would like a copy of that form sent to me today," I said. "And I would like you to flag this account for a fraud review, effective immediately." When the form arrived by email 3 hours later, I looked at the signature line for a long time. It was close. It was very close. But I had been signing my name the same way for 60 years, and whoever had signed that form had gotten the first initial right and everything else slightly wrong. The loop on the G, the break between the letters. Small things. The kind of things that only matter if you're looking. I was looking. Philip called back the following evening. His voice was careful, the way it always got when he had something bad to tell me. "Your son has been meeting with someone," he said. "A man named, well, it doesn't matter. What matters is that this man has a record. Financial fraud mostly. One charge of insurance fraud that got pleaded down. And Vincent has been meeting with him twice a week for the past 2 months. Coffee shop on Bel Air Road." I wrote down everything Philip told me. Then I sat very quietly in my kitchen for a long time. I thought about Iris. I thought about her telling me she wanted to go to law school, her eyes bright over the dinner table. I thought about the nurse at Mercy General, her voice low and careful. "I've seen a lot of falls." I thought about my son at 2847 in the morning, sitting in that waiting room with his elbows on his knees, his face doing something complicated for half a second before he rearranged it into grief. I made a decision. I would not confront him. Not yet. I had spent 3 decades watching people destroy evidence and rehearse stories the moment they felt cornered. I was not going to give Vincent that warning. I was going to be patient. I was going to let him believe that his father was an old man who noticed nothing, and I was going to watch. I called my attorney, a woman named Beverly who had handled my affairs for 15 years and who I trusted completely. I told her what I had. She listened without interrupting. The insurance form alone gives us forgery, she said. That's a felony, Eugene. Eugene. That's my name. Eugene Calloway. No, not Calloway. My name is Eugene Marsh. 63 years old, retired forensic accountant, Clearwater, Florida. And the man across the table from me at that moment, metaphorically speaking, was my own son. I know what it is, I said. I want to build the full picture before we move. I want to know who else is involved and exactly what they were planning. Beverly was quiet for a moment. You think the fall wasn't an accident? I think Iris was in the way, I said. I think she was asking too many questions about money, and I think my son got very nervous. The silence stretched. Give me 2 weeks, I said. Those 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I visited Vincent and Iris at their home 3 times, bringing groceries the first time, then a casserole his mother used to make, then just myself, sitting in their living room and talking about nothing, watching. Iris was recovering slowly. She moved carefully, favoring her right side, and there were moments when she looked at Vincent from across the room with an expression I recognized because I'd been wearing something similar, not quite fear, not quite suspicion, but the uncomfortable feeling of not being sure about something you had always taken for granted. On my 3rd visit, while Vincent was in the kitchen heating up coffee, Iris leaned toward me. Eugene, she said quietly. Did he ever… She stopped. Started again. Did Vincent ever talk to you about your life insurance? The amount of it? I looked at her. She looked back at me. Why do you ask? I said carefully. She glanced toward the kitchen. About 3 months ago, I found some papers on his desk. Printouts. It looked like projections almost. Like someone had run numbers. She swallowed. I asked him about it and he said it was nothing, just financial planning stuff. But the numbers I saw were much larger than anything we could account for from our own finances. She paused. I've been trying to convince myself I misread it. I reached over and put my hand over hers, very gently. Iris, I said, I need you to trust me, and I need you not to say anything to Vincent about this conversation. Can you do that? She stared at me. Then she nodded. I also need you to see a doctor, I said. A good one. One you choose yourself. Not someone Vincent recommends. Not someone from his network. Your own doctor. And I need you to ask for a full documentation of your injuries. I watched understanding move across her face like weather. Okay, she said softly. Okay, Eugene. The man Philip had identified, the one meeting Vincent at the coffee shop on Belair Road, turned out to be connected to a small-time insurance scheme that had run through Pinellas County twice in the past decade. The pattern was always the same. Identify a target with significant life insurance, create circumstances to accelerate the payout, collect. It was crude, and it was vicious, and it had put 2 people in early graves before prosecutors had been able to build a case, both times running up against the problem that the evidence was circumstantial and the key witness had recanted. I was not going to have a recanting witness problem because I was the target and I was still standing and I kept records the way other men kept heirlooms. Beverly filed a report with the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office. I provided the insurance company with a certified statement of fraud, which triggered their own investigation. A detective, a young woman who reminded me uncomfortably of Iris, sharp and thorough and wasting no words, came to my house and sat at my kitchen table and went through everything I'd assembled. The forged signature, the cash withdrawals and their timing, the meetings on Belair Road, the injury documentation Iris's own doctor had quietly prepared. This is thorough, the detective said, looking up from the folder. I used to do this for a living, I said. I can tell. The arrests came on a Tuesday morning, which I know because Beverly called me at 8:15 to tell me it was happening. Vincent and the man from the coffee shop, picked up separately. The charges were read as forgery, insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and because Iris's doctor had submitted her report and it had been reviewed by the county's forensic medical examiner, felony domestic battery. I sat in my kitchen after Beverly's call, and I did not feel what I expected to feel. I had imagined, in the weeks leading up to that moment, that there would be relief. Maybe even something like satisfaction. the clean click of a thing fitting into its correct place. Instead, what I felt was a very specific kind of grief. The kind that has no clean name, that sits in the throat and won't move. I had raised that boy. I had coached his little league team and driven him to SAT prep and stood next to him at his wedding with my hand on his shoulder and something like hope in my chest. And somewhere between that man and this one, something had gone so completely wrong that he had looked at his aging father and seen a policy number. I called Iris. She didn't pick up. I left a voicemail telling her that I loved her and that none of this was her fault and that she had people who would show up for her. She called back 40 minutes later. She was crying, but it was the specific crying of someone who had been holding something in for a very long time and had finally been given permission to put it down. I keep thinking I should have seen it sooner, she said. You saw it, I said. You came to me. That took more courage than most people have. The legal process took 8 months. The man from the coffee shop pleaded out early, testified against Vincent in exchange for a reduced sentence, and was given 3 years in a federal facility. Vincent went to trial. The forged insurance documents were the spine of the prosecution's case, and once Beverly's team put a handwriting expert on the stand alongside my own testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. Vincent received 7 years. The domestic battery charge added another 18 months consecutive. I was in the courtroom for the verdict. I sat in the second row, and when they read the sentence, I kept my face still and my hands flat on my knees, because that is what I know how to do. Vincent looked at me once, just before they let him out. I don't know what he was looking for. I don't know if he found it. Iris filed for divorce 2 months after the sentencing. I helped her find a good attorney, not Beverly, who specializes in different things, but someone Beverly recommended. A woman with a reputation for protecting people who needed protecting. The divorce was uncontested. I sold the house in Clearwater 9 months after all of this ended. Not because I couldn't afford to stay. I could, but because I'd sat in that kitchen too many nights with cold coffee and the sound of rain, and I was tired of the particular silence of a house where something heavy had happened. I moved to a smaller place in St. Petersburg, closer to the water, with a porch where the light is good in the mornings. Iris is in her first year of law school now. She sends me a text every few weeks, nothing elaborate, just checking in. Last month, she sent me a photo of herself in her school's library, surrounded by casebooks, with a caption that said only, "Still here." I looked at that photo for a long time. The nurse from Mercy General. I never got her name. I have thought about her often in the months since all of this resolved. The way she appeared beside me at that coffee machine. The way she chose to speak when she didn't have to. The way she looked at me and decided I was someone worth the risk. She could not testify. She was right about that. There are protocols. There are things a nurse can and cannot say in a legal proceeding, and I never asked her to cross that line. What she gave me was enough. She gave me the first moment of clarity in a situation that had been, until then, mostly darkness and bad coffee and the desperate wish that I was wrong. I was not wrong. I had been hoping to be wrong. There is a difference. Some people have asked me, when I've told pieces of the story, to friends, to a few people in a support group for elder fraud survivors I started attending last spring, whether I regret how long it took me to act, whether I should have gone to the police sooner, before things went as far as they did. I think about that question. I think about it more than I expected to. What I know is this. The evidence I built over those 2 weeks was what put him away for 7 years instead of 2. It was what protected Iris. Patience is not the same as inaction. Moving slowly and deliberately is not the same as doing nothing. I had spent 3 decades learning the difference, and it turns out that knowledge is the one thing that doesn't depreciate with age. I am 63 years old. I live in a house with good morning light. I have a cup of coffee that is almost always hot, because I have finally learned to make smaller amounts and drink them before they go cold. The things I lost, some of them cannot be recovered, and I have made my peace with that. The things I protected are still standing. That has to be enough. Most days it is. I keep coming back to that coffee machine. the quarters dropping in, the hum of the motor, and a woman I had never met deciding in a split second to say something she didn't have to say. That moment cost her nothing in the legal sense, and everything in terms of personal risk. She chose to speak anyway. I have thought about why a person does that. Steps outside the safe lane, says the quiet part out loud to a stranger, and what I keep arriving at is that it comes down to something simple and very hard at the same time. She knew what was right. She had the clarity to recognize it, and then she had the backbone to act on it. Those two things don't always live in the same person. I spent 31 years as a forensic accountant, which is a profession built entirely on the assumption that people will lie when there is enough money involved, and that the truth is always somewhere in the numbers if you're willing to look long enough. What I was not prepared for was having to apply that same patience to my own son. There is a particular kind of pain in watching someone you raised and loved and believed in become someone you have to investigate. It doesn't get easier because you're thorough. It doesn't hurt less because the evidence is solid. But here is what I also know. The weeks I spent building that case, quietly, carefully, without tipping my hand, were the weeks that made the difference between a charge that sticks and one that falls apart in court. Between Iris getting protected and Iris getting hurt again. Between 7 years and a plea deal that puts a man back on the street in 18 months to do the same thing to someone else's family. Patience is not weakness. Patience, when you know what you're doing and why, is one of the sharpest tools there is. What happened to my family was a failure of character. Vincent's character, and the character of the man he chose to listen to. That failure had consequences, the kind that compound and spread and don't stop at the person who made the original choice. Iris carried those consequences in her body. I carried them in ways that are harder to name. Actions move outward like that. They don't stay contained. And the reverse is also true. The nurse who spoke up set off a chain of events she will never fully see. Philip, who made calls and asked questions for an old friend without needing to know all the reasons. Beverly, who sat across my kitchen table and listened with the kind of focused attention that is itself a form of care. One decent choice, made by one person, ripples outward the same way a bad one does. What I want to say, if there's anything worth taking from what I've been through, is that getting older does not mean becoming less. The world will try to tell you that it does. It will try to tell you that you are slower, softer, easier to dismiss, easier to take from. I am 63 years old, and I used every year of those 63 to build a case that held up in a federal courtroom. The experience you carry is not dead weight. It is the thing that lets you move slowly and land hard. Iris is in law school now. She sends me texts on ordinary Tuesdays. That is what survived. That is what was worth protecting. Some mornings, that's the whole lesson. Other mornings, I need a little more coffee before it lands.